There might be fewer players, but there's never a lack of exciting action. This is the statewide Idaho 8-Man Prepcast with Brandon Baney and Paul Kingsbury.
That's right. It's another edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com, brought to you by the Idaho Division of Public Health. I'm Brandon Baney. Paul Kingsbury, nowhere to be found. So once again, I'm very pleased and delighted to bring in Will Hoenike, who is a good source for 8-Man info. Will, thank you again for stepping in to pinch hit. We appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Okay. Well, let's dive right into it. Normally we would say, here's how the teams did last week. But when you've got a matchup like Castleford at Carey, both teams 6-0, both teams undefeated, it's on IdahoSports.com. I mean, we got to start there. This is going to be a fantastic matchup on Friday.
On paper, it looks tremendous. I think the X factor is, Carey has been through many of these before. They get everybody's best punch every year, and Castleford, they have to prove that they can handle the spotlight, if you will. And I think beating Dietrich earlier in the year was a positive first step for them. But they're stepping into a little bigger ring this time around, and I think they're good enough. The question is, like I said, when that spotlight gets a little bit brighter, we're talking about, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. Sometimes you just don't know how they're going to respond. I'm sure Coach Lowry and his staff are going to do a great job having those kids prepared. But, you're walking right into the lion's den, so to speak, even though Carey isn't the Lions. But, you're walking into the big mat there. You're going to be wrestling with the big boys there. So it'll be a very interesting game to watch for sure.
That is the story of the week in 1A D2 football, no doubt about it. Carey won last week 58-0 over Camas County. Castleford had the week off, and otherwise the usual suspects kind of dominated. They're winning the games they're supposed to, right? North Gem beats Water Springs 62-24. Mullen St. Regis beats Clark Fork 62-22. Horseshoe Bend picked up a win via forfeit by Tri-Valley. You had Kendrick shutting out Timberline 54-0. So we're kind of seeing it, Will, right? We thought at the start of the year there was probably going to be like 6 or 7 teams that had a chance, and it's really playing out that way.
I think it is. I think that top 6 and maybe 7, but I think that top 6 for sure. I would say the top 5 in the state rankings, and Mullen St. Regis, who just kind of seems to be the oddball in that they're in District 1. It's not a disrespectful thing because that team can play. But, Kendrick, Carey, Castleford, these are the teams we've been talking about all year. And like you say, North Gem just doing what they do, Bridger Hatch left, Bridger Hatch right for 450 yards or whatever it was last week. So it's when we get to state playoff time, there are going to be tests, there are going to be battles. But I think we're kind of figuring out, we've got a pretty good idea of who the teams that are going to be playing well into November will be.
Yeah, Bridger Hatch, 442 yards, 21 yards per carry, new school record. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's putting himself right there in the mix for, 1A Division II State Player of the Year conversation. And that's become a crowded field because I think you got to look at Connor Simpson, over 800 yards and 20 touchdowns. You've got to look at Eric Taylor, the multi-purpose Castleford, it's rushing, passing, dual threat quarterback. He's over 50 tackles. I think you have to look at Ty Kep in Kendrick. I mean, all he does, unless he's playing Oakley, but Oakley shuts everybody down. All he does is throw for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns. You know what I mean? No big deal. And then, you've got Adam Ball and Luke Trogdon, who I think are at Mullen St. Regis, who I think are both tremendous football players. But in terms of state player of the year notoriety, they may cannibalize each other a little bit because having them both on the same team keeps either one of them from getting 20, 25 carries a game because you've got 2 kids plus Caleb Ball, the quarterback. The 3 of them are all so dynamic. There's only one football to move around. I think when it comes terms to winning state player of the year, that they might kind of pick at each other a little bit, but all 3 of those kids are excellent. All those kids that I've mentioned and others, Drew Plocker over at Water Springs, over 1,000 yards rushing and passing. There's a lot of tremendous players out there. And when it comes time for coaches to vote for things like all state and state player of the year, there are a lot of different ways it can go, and I'm not entirely sure there's a wrong answer.
Yeah, there's too many talented players, too many talented teams. The problem with Mullins St. Regis, why they haven't been in the polls, is they were in the polls to start the year. They lost their very first game, and then that top 5 has had such a stranglehold on it that they haven't been able to break back through. So
correct. And then, you get into like as a horseshoe bend, could somebody like Colton Meyer, is that somebody who could play his way with a strong finish into some strong consideration from coaches around the state? And I think he could, and you're right about Mullins St. Regis. And not only that, they haven't played anybody outside the Panhandle yet, and that's not their fault. You can only play who's on your schedule, but you haven't really, whereas Horseshoe Bend went over and played Water Springs. You have some other crossover opportunities. Not too many people have seen Mullins St. Regis yet, and I think that, obviously they've already punched their ticket for the state playoffs, so we will see them, and they'll have their opportunity to answer those questions in person, which I think is all Stetson Spooner and his players want, is that opportunity. But they haven't had it yet, and it's coming. They'll get it. And I think they've got a chance to do big things.
Yeah. Their loss came to Thompson Falls, Montana. They're 7-0 in Montana.
That's a good team. That's a good team. And
really
they play another Montana team this week in Charlo. And Spooner, the head coach up there, said the thing that he likes about that is Charlo kind of spreads it out and wings it around a little bit. And not too many teams in District 1 or District 2 for that matter do it that much. Maybe Kendrick a little bit, but not too many teams really spread the field out. It's a lot of power football up there, and so it'll give them a good look at a different style of football as they prepare for the playoffs.
Absolutely. Let me ask you real quick. So last week on the 8-Man Prepcast, we had Logan Green on, and he and I started looking at the brackets and starting to try to figure out this playoff puzzle. It's a lot easier at the 1A D2 level because it's all predetermined. You know how many teams are getting in from each league. You know where they're going on the bracket line. Do you like that, or do you think how 1A D1 is doing it, where we're going to seed teams and use max preps ratings? Which way do you prefer?
I think I would prefer the way that in terms of division winners and then at large, I think I like the way that that Division 1 does it. And I'll use the example of Clark Fork. The Wampus Cats, they're probably going to finish the year 6-2 and not play in the postseason by virtue of the fact that they happen to share a one bid league with Mullins St. Regis. And, there are a couple of teams down here where Water Springs at 1-5 is still very much alive. A team like Camas County or Hanson, who have struggled in the win-loss column, they're still alive for a playoff spot. And yet Clark Fork, who, like I say, they could finish 6-2, and they're a pretty good football team. They're already done. They're already, I think they play 2 more games, and then they're turning in their gear and getting ready for basketball. So in that context, I think I prefer, okay, let's give everybody's 1 seed a spot in, and then what's the number of at large? That becomes the question. Is it 4? Is it 6? Is it 8? Is it whatever? That part could be discussed, and I think there are arguments for several different methods. But I do think I like the idea of, I don't like teams knowing on, October 7th or whatever the date was when Clark Fork lost that game. Well, essentially, we're done. We're having a good year. We've got this big bully in our conference that we can't quite beat, but we're done with 2-3 games to play. I don't love that. It is what it is. I don't love it.
I'm with you. Two big injustices have been done to Division 1 up there when it comes to this D2 bracket. First of all, only the 1 team getting in. Clark Fork absolutely should be a playoff team this year. The second one is because the bracketing is predetermined, we already know that Mullins St. Regis more than likely is going to have to play the winner of the Carey Castleford game Friday night, which is awful. That's terrible that they have to play them right away after a first round bye.
That's a big beast right out of the gate for both those teams. If I'm Carey or Castleford, I don't know that I like looking at Mullins St. Regis coming down the road at me and not some sort of a quote unquote patsy or soft landing spot. And we've talked about it for years with the way the IHSAA has done it with the predetermined seeding, where you could potentially have the number 1 and the number 2 team in the state playing in the quarterfinals or the semifinals. It's easier for parts of a bracket to get overloaded that way, my opinion, on a year-to-year basis. It's not going to happen every year. Some years it works out okay. But I remember one year in particular, there was it was the 4A bracket where the East and the South, so District 4, 5, and 6 were loaded. And I mean loaded. And I forget who it was that wound up coming out, Blackfoot or somebody like that. And on the other side, the District 1, 2, and 3 wasn't quite as strong. And so Nampa they got their way through and they earned a state championship. And I'm never going to begrudge a team for qualifying for a state championship. No team should ever be embarrassed about that. But by the time it got to the state championship game, it felt almost anticlimactic. And it played out that way, as I believe it was Blackfoot. I could be mistaken. But, it was one of those games that was a 4-score game at halftime, and then you just kind of played out the string in the second half, and it didn't really feel like a state championship game, whereas Blackfoot's first-round game and second-round game, they felt like heavyweight knockout fights. You'd like to see Carey playing Mullen St. Regis in the semifinals or the championship and not the first round, or Castleford, whichever matchup that happens to be. And so that is a little bit of a flaw, if you will, in the predetermined. And it doesn't happen every year. It doesn't happen in every classification, but it does seem like there are plenty of examples where it does happen.
Yeah, I agree. We're to the point now where we should just be seeding the teams 1 through whatever based upon some sort of formula.
Well, especially now we're getting more crossover games like the 1A D2 or the 1A 8-man classic that they have at Middleton, where you're getting some of those teams from South Idaho and those teams from North Idaho, and they're meeting in the middle and playing. So you have a little bit of a better body of work, and you got Kendrick involved in that this year. And, you get, you try and get maybe a couple of more of those crossover-ish type games where you can get a little better feel. Horseshoe Bend playing Water Springs, that would be another one. As we pick up a few more of those games from time to time, and the willingness that some of these teams are now displaying to just meet in the middle. That Kendrick Oakley game in Parma, the Idaho 8-man classic being played in Middleton, allowing for that kind of, I think it really helps. It really helps the eyeball test. It really helps, okay, they may be 3-3, but boy, we know those 3 teams that beat them are all legitimate teams. So we know that team can play. I think that is the case.
Yep, I completely agree. There's one other interesting 1A D2 game Friday night in terms of it's a de facto playoff game. District 2, the White Pine League this year, gets 2 bids to the playoffs. Kendrick already has 1 spot pretty much locked up. Yep. The second spot is going to come down to whoever wins this game Friday night in Weippe as Lewis County takes on Timberline.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people had their eyes on Timberline coming into the year. They got sidetracked a little bit by COVID, and they're still a talented football team, and they could still very easily win this game. I like Lewis County. I like Ty Hambly. I like Gage Crow. I like what head coach Monty Madrell is doing there. When you're playing in some of those communities, you get what you have and you accentuate your strengths. And they run the football pretty well. They've got a couple of pretty good athletes, and they run the football pretty well. And I like their chances in this game. And like you said, it's essentially a de facto playoff game. And you're seeing more of those now as you're looking at, for instance, Water Springs playing Rockland, since we're talking 1A D2. If Water Springs can win that game, and I think they can with Drew Plocker and his teammates, I think they can win that game. If they win that game, things are really interesting over in District 5-6 as far as their playoffs. North Gem, we think, is getting through. But if there's a second spot to be had, which I believe there is,
there's 3 spots. So all 3 teams, I mean, whoever loses this game will still be in the 3. Will be in a decent position, but they're going to have to travel to for the opening round of the playoffs. they would have to travel to whoever wins the Carey Castleford game. So that's what they're playing for, avoiding that monster.
Okay, yeah. So and that's a sizable monster to avoid, no doubt about that. So so you're right. I mean, it's that's a good point. I didn't realize they had 3. I thought they just had 2. So it's not quite a playoff game, but it's a seeding game, and it's there's a big difference between being a 2 and a 3 in that setting. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we flip over to 1A D1, kind of the same story. The teams that are supposed to be quote unquote supposed to be winning are Butte County beat Chalice 40-6. Oakley shut out Glens Ferry 64-0. You had Prairie. The big game, I think, was Prairie Lapway, right? Everybody was looking at, okay, these are the 2 best teams in the White Pine League. Prairie showed that, hey, we're still the top dog. 58-26, the final.
What I was most interested to see, and you're right, what I was most interested to see was Prairie's defense against Lapway's offense, because so far, Lapway's offense is the only offense that has done anything against Oakley in 32 points, 34 points in that season opening game at Middleton in the 8-man classic there. Oakley has given up 12 points total since then. Meanwhile, Lapway is averaging 50 points a game. So was this going to be a 52-48 type game? But what we saw that Prairie, when it needs to, it can bow its neck a little bit defensively, and it can make some plays. Brody Hasselstrom gets a lot of the accolades, but Dalton Ross and some of those other guys, they got other kids who can play ball up there. And I was impressed with the defense, basically limiting Lapway enough where the offense could build a lead and then hold on for, what was an important win.
And if we look now at the 1A D1 playoffs, kind of different from the D2 postseason, where your 5 conference champs automatically get in. 4 of the top 4 of those 5 get a first round bye. And then the other 6 spots are all at large bids that are determined by the Max Preps rating system. I'm going to run down the list of, if the playoffs started today, these would be the 6 at large teams. And you tell me what you think. In order, it would be Lapway, Grace, Murtaugh, Genesee, Glens Ferry, and Potlatch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that sounds about right given where they are, but with 2 weeks to go, there's still some changes that can happen. I think the one that might surprise people a little bit is Glens Ferry, because they've only won, I think they're 1-4, maybe 1-5. But they've got a couple winnable games coming up, build some of that momentum. And, there is a strength of schedule component, as I understand it. And when you're playing in that league with Raft River, with Oakley, with Murtaugh, when that's who you're playing with, you're going to get a little bit of strength of schedule bump. So, will they hold on to one of those 6 spots? Hard to say. I do wonder if Wilder could play their way into it at 4-2 out of the Western Idaho Conference. Rimrock. What about Rimrock? They play Notice this week. If they win that game, I think that throws, first of all, it throws the Western Idaho Conference's automatic bid wide open. But number 2, I think that pushes Rimrock into the conversation for a potential at-large spot. And then, Genesee with a chance to really solidify itself this weekend when they take on Prairie, and that's going to be a tall order. But I think Genesee's a pretty good football team. Angus Jordan and Cy Wareham and Jack Johnson, very quietly, is having a really nice year for Genesee. And you talk about important games, that Potlatch Kamei game. If Kamei wants to fight their way back into it, it starts Friday. They need to beat Potlatch. And if they do, the road opens up a little bit for the Cubs, because then they play Clearwater Valley next week. And while Clearwater Valley is no pushover, that's a game I think Kamei would expect to go into and be able to win. And if they win those 2 games, I got to think that they're probably in.
Yeah, so there's a lot of movement still to be determined with these Max Preps ratings. The 2 next teams that are just out are Wilder and Clearwater Valley. That's another CV's another 1-5 team that's just played a gauntlet of a schedule.
Oh, brutal. Yeah, brutal schedule. And they've been in a lot of those games too. They're not necessarily getting boat raced every week.
Right, exactly. The formula isn't perfect, Will, because you mentioned Rimrock, a team that should be closer to the playoff bubble than they are. They're behind Lighthouse Christian in the Max Preps ratings, and Lighthouse hasn't even won a game yet. Lighthouse is right behind CB at 0-6.
And that could be another one. You talk about gauntlet schedules. You look at who Lighthouse Christian has played. They've played just a who's who of 1A 8-man football. So you're right. It is imperfect. It's the system we have to work with. I think Wilder has a chance to play their way into the conversation. I think Kamei has a good chance to play their way firmly into the conversation. But, what happens if Clearwater Valley picks up a couple wins? Do they sneak in? Alan Hutchins and his team up there, they've got some kids who can play up there, and they're not necessarily a fun matchup for a lot of teams. So, so much to be determined. And that's the fun part about, having an at-large system is you can look at a team like Lighthouse Christian and their coach can go into that locker room and he can say, look, we're 0-5, but if we take care of business, we got a chance to play playoff football. And that's a big incentive. That's a big reason for a team to keep coming to work every day, so to speak. Whereas when we talked about with the 1AD2, Clark Fork, they're 4-2 and essentially done. I mean, they're playing, but they play Kootenai this week. And I'm not sure if they play next week or not, but maybe they don't. Maybe Kootenai this week is it for them. But 5-2 and 4-2 and pretty much knowing you're done versus 0-5 and knowing that you're still in it. And not only you're still in it, you still have a hand in how it turns out for you. If Lighthouse gets hot and they've got some players, Clay Silva's a good football player. If they get hot and win a couple ball games, I don't know that that's going to be a super easy night's sleep for the coach that sees them on the line against them. You know what I mean? Yeah. But then meanwhile, like we say, Clark Fork's like, Brian Arnton, thanks so much, but you're done. It's tough from a competitive standpoint.
For sure. So Lighthouse finishes, they're at Oakley this Friday. Win or lose, that probably won't ding their rating too much because Oakley, of course, is the top-ranked team. And then they play Glens Ferry in the regular season finale. That could be the winner goes to the playoffs.
Maybe it could. And I'd have to be privy, or I'd say we would have to be privy to the formula itself. But it very well could be that. It could be, the winner of that game is that last team in. I had a coach who once told me, and I've always found this to be very apropos, that he'd rather be the ugliest kid asked to the dance than the prettiest kid left at home. And in a metaphorical standpoint, I agree with that. Just get me in the game. Just give me a chance to compete. And I think that for approximately 99.9% of high school football teams across America, if you told them, let's use the 1AD1 classification. Okay. Lighthouse Christian, you are 1-6 and your reward is you have to go to Oakley on a Friday night. The wind is going to be blowing sideways. It's going to be cold. It's going to be miserable and, win or go home. You know what those Lighthouse Christian kids are going to say, or those Glens Ferry kids are going to say? Hell yeah. Sign me up. Let's go play.
Yep. I agree. You talked about being privy to the Max Preps formula. You've got a better chance of finding out what the 11 herbs and spices are in the KFC fried chicken than finding out what goes into that formula. They've got that under lock and key. So,
yeah. I mean, I really like the Idaho Sports power rankings. I mean, again, no mathematical formula where there's not more intersectional play is going to be perfect. But I've always found, generally speaking, the power rankings are pretty close, pretty accurate to where, they generally stay, if you were to line up teams by the eye test, and you see a lot of games and I see a lot of games. And if we were just to say, okay, here are the top 6 teams as we see it, and then go look at the IdahoSports.com power rankings, 3 and 4 might be different or 5 and 6 might be flip-flopped, but it's generally pretty close.
Yep. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch everything unfold this weekend. Before we wrap things up, Will, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsors from the Idaho Division of Public Health, and we'll be right back to wrap it up. The Idaho 8-Man Prepcast on IdahoSports.com.
It's time to start planning for back to school. That's why I got my kids vaccinated for COVID-19. Kids 12 and older can get vaccinated. The vaccines have been researched and tested. They're safe and they work. And I hope everyone will choose to get vaccinated too.
All right. That'll do it for this edition of the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast. Will Hoenike, thank you so much for stepping in again. We really appreciate it.
No problem. It was fun. All
right. And we'll have plenty to talk about again next week. Of course, a couple of 8-man broadcasts on IdahoSports.com Friday night. Carey, Castleford, Paul Kingsbury, and Logan Green will have the call for that. We'll also have...
I'm jealous. I would like to be there for that one.
I know. That's going to be a fantastic game. We will also have audio-only broadcasts of Prairie at Genesee on Friday night as well up north. And then Saturday, we will be bringing you video coverage of Lapway as they take on Logos. That will be a 6 o'clock kickoff on Saturday night. So a lot of 8-man action on the IdahoSports.com broadcast schedule. Of course, you can go to...
I know what I'm going to be doing.
That's right. Lock it in for sure. All right. You can always find all the games at the Game Streams tab on IdahoSports.com. For Will Hoenike, I'm Brandon Baney. Thanks for tuning in to the Idaho 8-Man Prepcast from IdahoSports.com.